Extremist groups of the right and left seem to be on the rise. It's a historic European tradition, the disillusion with the ancien régime. Out with the old, in with, well, what? French, Marxist, right-wing, green. All revolutions, but do they have a common denominator? And what does far right and far left mean anyway these days? Join me, Jan Darasz, for How We Got Here.
Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, many experts and scholars believed that the days of radical populist parties successfully operating in Europe were over. However, the growing prominence of Alternative for Germany on the German political scene is closely monitored not only by Germany's allies in the EU, but also enemies further east. The party is openly pro-Russian, and since the beginning of the war, AfD lawmakers have categorically opposed the supply of arms to Ukraine. The AfD has been a part of the Bundestag since 2017 and is represented in 15 of the 16 state parliaments. Current polls show it's the second largest party in the country. The rise in support for far-right populists comes at a time of growing discontent with the center-left federal government of the Social Democrats, Greens and neoliberal Free Democrats. AfD quickly became a meeting point for right-wingers who saw the existing far-right extremist groups as too radical, but who were disappointed with the liberal tendencies of former CDU Chancellor Angela Merkel. After more than a decade of being the parliamentary opposition, the AfD is now heavily set on government participation. It may not be within reach at the federal level, but AfD leaders believe they have a chance in the East German state structures. The AfD sees the CDU as a potential coalition partner. Conservatives, however, have ruled out such coalitions, even by adopting resolutions on the issue at party conferences. Some wonder if this is enough. According to reports, there are various groups within the CDU that are ready to cooperate with the AfD.
My guest today is Dr. Piotr Andrzejewski of the Institute for Western Affairs in Poznań and also of the Institute of Political Studies at the Polish Academy of Sciences. So welcome to the programme.
It's a pleasure to be here, finally in person and not only online.
Great to have you in the flesh. We'll start, before we move on to the phenomenon of extremist groups in European history and the European experience, we'll start off with one of the more well-known groups in Germany, the AfD. Can you describe the origins and the evolution in Germany? Is it a regional grouping? Is it generally Euro-skeptic grouping? How would you characterise?
It's a very fascinating story. The Alternative für Deutschland, the Alternative for Germany, started as a sort of Eurosceptical party led by professors of economics. And with each passing year, it changed and it developed more into what we call now right-wing populist parties or to a far-right party. And this evolution is towards the outer limits of the political spectrum. It's becoming more and more radicalized with each passing year. So it started from soft Euroscepticism and is moving towards extremist position right now.
So can you give us an example of the soft aspect and then the extreme aspect?
Well, it started simply with a call for the reform of the Eurozone, or leaving the Eurozone by Germany, made by certain economy professors. But now the main topic, obviously, in Germany is, for the AfD party, is immigration. It is preserving the true German culture and so on. And we are moving to the area where even re-immigration is proposed. And what do I mean by re-immigration? It's a term coined just 3 months ago in a meeting in Adlon Hotel in Berlin, which means deporting even German citizens of foreign origins who break the law or do not behave accordingly in the eyes of the AfD. So it is two completely different ideas, and we can clearly see that the development is moving towards a more extremist side.
I mean, there's a reductio ad Hitleram in political debate where opponents are almost immediately after some sort of argument are charged with being a Nazi kind of party. Is this what's happening to the AfD? I mean, would you describe it as a Nazi party or as a far-right party? And what's the difference?
Well, there's a huge difference between being far-right and neo-Nazi. Being neo-Nazi is trying to follow into the steps of the National Socialist Workers' Party from Germany with very racist ideology intertwined. But being far-right is something completely different. In political science, we use far-right, the term of far-left. We use this term simply to position the party on the political spectrum. And this political spectrum is different for each state. In one country, what is considered, let's say, center-right could be considered far-right in another country. So it's simply a denominator where a certain party is positioned on the political spectrum. This is what far-right means. It's not equivalent in the meaning of an extremist group or neo-Nazi group. It's not the same.
And so what's the definition of an extremist group or a populist group, as you mentioned before? Yeah.
Okay, so we're opening a new topic with populism. By extremism, of course, we simply want to highlight the radicalism of an ideology that is of a certain party. And when we speak of populism, it's a completely different story. A populist party is considered to be an anti-establishment party, a party that gives voice to the masses or to the general people. It's a party that wants to see a certain change in the way the political system in a certain state is constructed and maintained. So this is populism. And more often than not, it happens that far-right or far-left parties are considered to be populist as well.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the AfD has its origins in a group of academics who have a mild Eurosceptic stance. Do they reach out into the culture and the history of Germany, or is this just a party that's appeared to address political current problems?
No, this was, it started as a sort of a technocratic party that had very specific ideas they wanted to implement in the political system of Germany. But it quickly turned out it is much more politically profitable to go in the ways of anti-immigrant sentiment, follow the anti-immigrant sentiment or anti-Islamist sentiment in the German society that is growing with each passing year. So from being a small technocratic party, it developed into a much more populist party.
I mean, it's obviously addressing legitimate needs about immigration, isn't it, in German society as well as European society as a whole?
Well, if you look at Germany, actually, we have 16 regions, the lands, and AfD is very strong in the former GDR states, so Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, Brandenburg, Thüringen, and Saxony, especially Saxony, where in the local elections it is usually the first party on the polls. However, if you look on Western Germany, there AfD is polling between 15 to 18%, and it's a different party there. It has to use different arguments in the eastern parts of the country and has to use different arguments in the western parts of the country. Communicates differently with its electorate, and of course the eastern part is much more radical. We could see this in a recent debate between a CDU politician of the Christian Democratic Union, Mario Voigt, and Björn Höcke from AfD, who is considered to be the leader of the more radical wing of the party. And Höcke was named a neo-Nazi in this debate as well. This argument ad Hitlerum, which is very poignant in Germany, especially, has been used.
Yes, of course.
Been used.
I mean, is it a feature of not only German culture but modern European culture that the centrist parties, however the mainstream parties, tend to adopt these radical elements of a radical policy? Is that going to be how do you see that happening in Germany? Does CDU and the establishment, will that pick and choose in order to kind of emasculate the AfD in elections?
Well, since the 1990s, there is a surge in populist right or far-right parties in Europe in general. And there were different ways how the mainstream parties try to deal with them. One of the ideas was to create the so-called cordon sanitaire, so a way to block those parties, not to give them platform, and do not, in any circumstances, form coalitions with them. However, this policy was already broken, first time in Austria in the year 2000, where the centrist Austrian People Party entered a coalition with the Freedom Party of Austria, the FPÖ.
Yes. I mean, you mentioned the Austrian, the phenomenon appearing in Austria. Could you tell us about that?
Well, the phenomenon of the Austrian political scene is that this is one of the first countries where far-right populism became very successful. In the times of the populist of Jörg Haider till the year 2008, until his death in a car crash, his party surged to 27%. Then, after several breakups and fragmentation of the political scene on the far right, now it's back on track. It's polling now almost at 30%. So it's a success story for far right, and it's also a beacon for other parties. Austria is a benchmark it especially resonates in Germany for AfD, which is in close contact with the FPÖ, especially for the last 2 years. And they try to mimic the FPÖ policies, the FPÖ political strategy, and the fact that both of the politicians from those two states speak German, it makes the communication much easier. And the political culture is also quite similar. So it's easier to replicate the success of FPÖ by the AfD in Germany.
And does the far right have a companion, an opposite number on the far left? You mentioned before this new Bolshevik party that's emerging in Germany. Is that just a natural feature of European politics? You have a far right swing to the right, and then it's a reaction, and then an action, and then an equal and opposite reaction on the left.
First of all, I wouldn't call them Bolshevik. They are left wing. There are two movements in German-speaking countries. In Germany, we have the Bündnis of Sarah Wagenknecht, a leader of the left party, Die Linke, which she seceded from it and formed her own movement. And she tries to combine left-wing policies with a more anti-immigrant stance. And at the same time, in Austria, we can see the rise of the Communist Party of Austria, the KPÖ. And it's a phenomenon because this party was dormant for more than 5 decades, since the beginnings of the Cold War, basically. And now it's on the rise, using housing problems and social issues as their main platform. So we can speak about the rise of not only right-wing populism, but left-wing populism as well.
So why would the right fail to harness social problems like the housing problem, like you mentioned there? Is that a failure of the right not to take advantage of social...
They do, but they try to...
Why is it a left thing?
They do, but they frame it in a different way. If there's a housing problem, the far right usually blames it on the masses of immigrants that are housed by the state at the cost of the native population of those states. And the left-wing populism, they want to introduce more social building policies. They try to frame this problem and look at this problem from a different angle. But it's the same problem nonetheless.
As we wind up our discussion, who benefits from what seems to be an increasing polarization in European politics, disillusionment with the EU elites, the globalization movement, the green movement in a certain way? Who stands to benefit from this friction between right and left?
Well,
is there a friction between right and left?
That's a good question, because it's more of I see the lines of conflict that are drawn in different places than left and right. This is a distinction, a political distinction that is from the past, actually. What's more important is between localists and globalists, between what's considered mainstream and what's considered being outside of the mainstream. And there is a huge dissatisfaction in European populations, which we probably will see in the upcoming European elections. And of course, the parties that benefit the most are the far-right parties. The emergent far-left parties, this is a new phenomenon. It requires some time to develop. However, the thing is that when we see that there's dissatisfaction and disillusionment coming from both the left and the right, it's bad news for mainstream parties, because now they're going to be flanked from both sides politically.
And what about the external influence? We've heard of the influence not only in Europe but also in America of the Russian hackers and political trolls are trying to divide these parties. Do you see that as increasing? Is there a way to combat this in the European mentality?
Well, the thing is that it's obvious that far-right parties across Europe have connections with Russia and the Russian regime of Vladimir Putin. It's not only about the money. It's also seeking some ideological patronage. And here, the Austrian case is once again key to understand it. It was the FPÖ party, the Freedom Party of Austria, that was the first party in Europe to sign an agreement with the One Russia party, the party of Vladimir Putin. Then Lega, the Italian far-right party, followed suit. And now there were meetings and even balls organized in Vienna, where far-right politicians met with representatives of Russian oligarchs. Of course, there was talks of funding, of how to conduct how to implement political strategies, how to communicate, and it's much deeper than it looks on the surface, because it's also an ideological connection.
Well, how do you see the common ground then between the far right and countries like Russia? What links them together? There are several things. One of them is the anti-EU sentiment, and the other one is the anti-American sentiment, is having the stance of being an anti-NATO party. Yes. Austria is a neutral country, and it's easier there. However, you could see that the AfD in Germany, or even the Rassemblement National in France, they're NATO-skeptical parties, which is something in line with Russian policy, foreign policy. We have to draw it to a conclusion. Dr. Andrzejewski, thank you very much for coming onto the programme, and also for this fascinating and still work in progress discussion. Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
That's all we have time for today, so join us again next time for How We Got Here.